Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Let's Write an Adventure, our ongoing live stream where we're creating a completely unique campaign in real time. I'm RJ Kerr, I'm your host as always, and today we are going to be doing something a little unusual. We're not going to be working on our current campaign. Instead, we're going to take a step back, and I'm going to walk you through a one shot that I wrote for some of our regular viewers here uh, and ran and wanted to do kind of an after action report on this. We talk a lot on this channel about how to put a high level of polish on an adventure or in a campaign because we really have unlimited time to work on this kind of stuff, right? So we can pour tons of ideas, we can come back to things over and over and over again. But when you are writing on a time crunch, writing in real time for an ongoing campaign or ongoing adventure where you have a deadline, you don't always have that luxury. So today I wanted to kind of walk you through this adventure that I wrote that was under a time crunch. It was a little more realistic in terms of the amount of content that I could create within that time, and how I wrote it for myself so that I would still have a flourishing adventure that really kind of played out, I think overall well. But what sorts of things that I left out for myself to come up with during the game, what sorts of things that I put into the initial construction that worked, things that didn't work, things that I would change for the future, I would add in later, all that kind of stuff. So with that, we are going to start walking through this one shot. Before I do, just remember this is an interactive live stream. So as you have thoughts, ideas, opinions, suggestions, feedback, questions, comments, concerns, any of that kind of stuff, please don't hesitate to jump in the chat. Love to hear from you guys, and feel free to toss out ideas for updates to this one shot adventure. It certainly won't be the only time I run it. So, let me go ahead and share my screen and we will get rocking and rolling. So, this one shot was called The Crucible of the Fourfold Path. And when I was initially commissioned for this, I took some comments on the kind of content that my players wanted, and they would be our very own Orth, Mr. Mex, and Jonathan Frost. And the feedback that I got initially was they were looking for an adventure that had some escape room kind of feels to it. They're looking for a fair amount of puzzles. They were also looking for maybe some adventures through the planes. So a lot of planar energy and that sort of and those sorts of themes. So I took that and I started brainstorming my way through. And so I opened up a new document using this, using our typical campaign template here. And instead of jumping into the various sections here, I scrolled all the way down to the bottom. And since I was just doing a one shot and I only had a limited amount of brainstorming I needed to do, I started here. I decided kind of arbitrarily that I wanted fifth level characters for this, mainly because I had done a number of one shots recently for third level characters, and I wanted to kind of bump this up to the next tier and play around with that. And I thought that would be fun for everybody in the group. Um, so I thought about it a little while, and I came up with this idea that perhaps while investigating another dungeon, the characters fall into a trap, which transports them to a planar dungeon from which they must escape or perish. And that was kind of my core idea here was to encapsulate those escape room kind of feels. I'd make the mission to escape. That would be the objective, and that we would follow in with those planar, elemental planar sort of vibes as we went through. And so I made a couple of notes for myself for themes to kind of come back to things that I wanted to work into this. You know, planar creatures wanted there to be portals because we want to be a more than one plane, death trap sort of thing for the escape room, but we'd probably lower the lethality of some of it. Needed to be puzzles. We wanted some time pressure, and I had this idea that I wanted the characters to be almost fleeing from something, to be kind of hunted through this. And so that was a really early thought, which changed a little bit as I went through designing it, but captured all those ideas at the very beginning. Then I sat down and I started working on, um, what I call budgets and stocks, right? So this is where I'm coming up with what the challenge ratings are for or my XP budgets for the various challenges for combat. Low, moderate, high. Sometimes I'll look at a daily budget, one shot. I ended up not needing to really worry about it. Gave myself a CR range. So I went to the monster manual. I double checked how much XP each CR delivers, and gave myself a reasonable swing here so that it wouldn't be too much or too little. We wouldn't have hordes of little guys that they just kind of slaughtered and mowed their way through. We wouldn't have creatures that were so mind-bogglingly powerful they could one-shot our fifth level characters. And then to kind of get a little bit of idea about the spread of creatures, I simply went into D&D Beyond and I sorted by creature type. Elemental is what I used, and then I sorted by CR. And I started with these CR2 through CR6, and ended up adding in a CR1.5 later when I realized I needed a lower level fire elemental. But we'll come back to that. So literally just went through the list, copied down the different elementals that fit those CRs, put them in a list for myself so that I had quick references so that as I was working through all of this going forward, I could jump back, come back to this kind of thing, and not have to keep going back to the monster manual. I'd have these numbers at hand while I was working out and building this and kind of brainstorming. And you'll notice some of these things aren't elementals. For example, Green Hag is not an elemental. But there were places in this adventure where I was, neither is a mage. Places in this adventure where I was thinking, maybe we want to mix it up just a little bit. Maybe I want to add some of that as a feel, and I ended up not using those. But I wanted them. This is all a brainstorming list. This is all tools in my toolbox to pull from. Is the idea. So this took me a couple minutes to kind of knock this out and start with this core concept and this core information to help me start building this out. The next thing that I did is I got off of this document and I grabbed a sheet of paper. It happened to be graph paper in this case, but went about doing a loose sort of flow chart for the rooms. I decided that I wanted to jump off with a 5x5 or a 5+5 room structure for this adventure, meaning that you have sort of 5 challenge rooms and 5 theme rooms throughout the adventure, and that way you have a good mix of traps and hazards and combat encounters and other sorts of challenges and puzzles and what have you. But you also have places where the tension lulls for a moment. The characters can kind of catch their breath. They can do a little bit of exploring and so on. So with that in mind, and knowing that I wanted to have spaces for all 4 elements, I created, and I hope you guys can see this on here, a really, really messy flowchart. All right, where literally I just started making circles that included rooms that needed to be in there. So, for example, there needed to be an entry. There needed to be a climactic encounter at the end. So, in this case, a BBEG. There needed to be an exit because their goal was to escape. And then I wanted there to be I wanted there to be, a puzzle room and a combat encounter for each and every element that we walked through here. So that gave me at least 2 rooms for each element. And then I knew that I wanted some theme rooms mixed in as well, again, to kind of space this out. And that came out to about 2 per element, just for mathematical consistency we went through here. So we ended up with 4 different distinct spaces for each element. And I realized as I built this out, as I was building this web, that if I really wanted the players to have to explore some of this and to really encounter a number of different elemental rooms, that I needed to put in some other spaces that sort of bottlenecked them in certain places. And I'm not usually a big fan of bottlenecking in one-shots, but what I did is created a central puzzle. I had no idea what that was going to be yet, but knew that there was going to be kind of a halfway point where the characters had to solve this interior puzzle, or I should say, solve this middle puzzle by exploring these early rooms, and then they'd be able to advance to these next set of rooms and get to our BBEG. And I played around with this a little while, paying attention to the different paths between the spaces so that there wasn't a situation in which the characters could just get lucky and follow one path that didn't have any challenges on them and walk themselves all the way to the end, because that wouldn't be fun for anybody. So I probably spent about, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes playing around with this. This is far more complicated than I would normally do for a one shot or for a map. But I wanted this to have, since we're leaning into the escape room thing, I wanted this to have sort of a labyrinth feel to it, where there was lots of routes to take, and not all of them led to where we wanted to go. Um, so, with this sort of central concept, very loose concept in mind, I started sketching out the various rooms. And now, I mean, I added things to this later. For example, I realized that I wanted them to have a place where they could rest and recuperate as I made some of these challenges a little more difficult, as I made some of them more lethal. And I wanted there to be kind of a theme to that, and I ended up settling on this being a Sphinx sort of space here. And well, Sphinx spoke riddles to me that fed well into the concept of some of the puzzles that I wanted to fit in here. And so again, just very loose brainstorming on this, and then I numbered all of these spaces and broke out kind of based off of the elements where I thought things should go, and then sat down to sketch out these rooms. So put that on the side of my desk and went through and started building out these spaces. Came up to the adventure here, knew that by counting all those little circles on there that I was going to have 20 different rooms, or 20 different elemental spaces in here. Um, and we and then started mapping those out as we went here. So I just kind of made that list of 20, knew that I'd need a line for the conclusion, knew that I would need some general notes on general features, and put that together and started really kind of just working my way through this as I had ideas. So at that point, I knew that I needed to mix up these rooms a little bit, that we couldn't have, all of the combat encounters in one, in the first four rooms. We couldn't have all of the puzzles in the next four rooms and so on. So I went back to my map here and I just kind of jotted down, theme room, setback puzzle, theme room, setback puzzle, and just kind of worked my way through so that no matter what route the characters took through this, they were going to run into uh, setbacks or puzzles among the theme rooms. So with that and these numbered, I just started putting in some headings on this, right? So I would come to each room, I would put it in, and I would say, okay, this room is going to be the entry, and I would put TBD and a quick description for myself on some ideas I had for it, and then I would move on to the next space. Um, so then again, I would come back to the next space. I would put that this was an earth room and it was a setback. And if I had ideas, I would note that down and I would build that out as we went. Um, and I just did that for every single room. And you'll notice that some of these rooms, some of the themed rooms, I didn't put anything more in here than this is a wind theme room, and there is no threat in it. There's no trap. There's no bad guys to fight. It's just an environmental space. And so again, it did that for each and every one of these 20 rooms, knowing that I wanted to culminate in a BBEG that was all of the elements together. I wanted them all to converge in this space thematically. Um, and so just started filling that kind of stuff in very, very loosely as I went through this. The next step was to identify the rooms where there were actual combat encounters, the ones that were going to be fights, for the most part. And I went through and figured out, okay, so what's my earth setback? What is my air setback? What's my water setback? And what is my fire setback? And based off of where they were on my flow chart, I made some of them low difficulty. I made some of them moderate difficulty. I saved the hard difficulty for the BBEG, the final confrontation, so we'd have some levels of play throughout all of that. And I just created these combat encounters via the creature list and the challenge rating I put together here, and I put no other detail in this space. I knew that I'd want something else in here because we want to put some layers onto combat encounters, But I didn't do that right away. I literally just filled in the encounters and then moved on to each room where we had those. So those first four encounters. Then I sat down to tackle the rooms that I thought were going to be probably the most difficult for me, and those were the puzzle rooms. Um, and so I did some brainstorming on those. They probably took the longest here, but again, I didn't want to overthink these puzzles here. One of the things that you'll find is that I should say players tend to overthink puzzles. They'll come up with their own solutions in a lot of cases, and some of those will work, some of those won't work, but they'll put lots of thought and they'll explore things that you didn't really think about here. And so you want to give yourself some flexibility, but you also don't want to make these super specific and super difficult. So, for example, for the fire puzzle, I came up with this idea of four ever burning braziers of different colors. So the fires were, orange, red, blue, and white, and that ash swirling in the air would give sort of a hazy sort of inscription that would give a little bit of clue and some direction on what they needed to do, and that there would be a pile of coal sitting nearby. And effectively, they needed to feed the one that was true fire, and the rest were fake. Uh, and simply put, the solution here that in this case the true fire was the blue flame, and that they put the coals in there, and they would succeed the puzzle. I put a couple clues in here that they could figure out by examining the various braziers. For example, the orange flame produces no heat. The red one gives off a little heat, but it dances above the brazier as if disconnected from the coals. The white radiates cold instead of heat, that kind of deal. And then I put in a little trap if they got the answer incorrect. I did not yet know that the result would be finding an idol that became important to the central puzzle. So when I hadn't figured out what that central puzzle was yet, I just knew that there would be some kind of reward for solving these puzzles that needed to help move the adventure forward. So I did that for all four elements, and I think as I work our way through here, yeah. So one for the water puzzle, which they got right away, and we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the actual playthrough and what I would change here in a bit. Um, but then we moved on through the various spaces here. We had a wind setback, so we had an encounter there, and I added into the map. I told you I had this room for rest where I wanted to have sort of this Sphinx theme, and that lent to riddles. And so I mapped out what rooms would be able to access that Sphinx space from, and put in extra doors, extra portals, and these were riddle doors, and they could only be opened with the solution of the riddle. Now, the riddles, I did not make them terribly complicated. In fact, that was by design, because riddles are a lot of fun, but they can also be just the absolute bane of your player's existence if you make them too difficult. You want to make them pretty straightforward, and you want to give context clues to help solve them, because people get frustrated when they can't solve riddles, but they feel awesome when they do, right? So this was an air themed room, and so I said, you cannot see me, yet I fill every hall. I carry the leaf and the raven's call. I whisper and howl. I lift and I fall. What am I? Felt but not seen at all. And lo and behold, the answer is wind or air. Very straightforward, contextually from this room. But because your players won't expect things to be that simple, they'll overthink this a little bit. It'll take them a minute to get it, and then eventually it'll click, and they'll feel like they really succeeded. It's something that is a little bit of a gamble, especially in a one shot. Riddles are a little bit of a gamble in a one shot, but if you make them, if you give enough clues for them, you make them straightforward enough, it's something that they can really add to your game and make your players really feel like they're succeeding. So at this point, I didn't know what kind of treasure I was going to put in these spaces. I was just sketching out the high level sort of elements as we went through here. And again, I did that for every single room, even the themed rooms that had really no detail to them, but had a real door. I put those in. Um, then I worked my way through this, and eventually I came to this central puzzle. I needed that centerpiece to sort of pin all of sort of pin the two halves of this together. And so I was really kind of scratching my head about this. I was trying to figure out what sort of what sort of puzzle I'd want to do, what I would want to do here, because I didn't want this to be reflective of a single element. I wanted to sort of bring that together, and I got thinking about a couple different things. One, I started thinking about the sort of uh, the original sort of meanings of pentagrams and that kind of thing, and that each point was actually to represent one of the four elements, and then the fifth point was spirit. And that made me think of the Fifth Element, and I thought, oh, Fifth Element's a great movie. I should absolutely watch that tonight. And I watched the Fifth Element. And I watched the puzzle. And I was like, oh, I bet I could steal that, because let's be honest, good artists borrow, great artists steal. Right? So didn't want it to be exact, but I knew that if I made that the central puzzle, that it was something that one was likely to translate very easily. It's something that fit the story thematically, but also that it was something that my players were likely to recognize. Meaning that this room wouldn't need a whole lot of explanation. They wouldn't have to, uh, you know, they wouldn't have to put a lot of thought into this particular puzzle, especially since they had so many other puzzles to deal with, and it's theoretically a one shot. We wanted to keep it within one session. That didn't pan out, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. And so. Uh, so we wanted this puzzle to be relatively straightforward in solution, and now that meant that they had to go find these various pieces and parts to it, which gave me the rewards for the four setbacks that predated this puzzle, or I should say the two setbacks and the two puzzles that predated this central room here. So I went back, I filled those in, um, and then I went back to the combat encounters and said, okay, they're combat encounters. We know now that they're defending these idols. We have that information, but to make these more interesting than just being straight up fights, I want to put a little bit of a hazard in these spaces. And so I wanted to put something in here that complicated it, that meant that that even though the objective was to acquire the idol, it was something that the the characters couldn't just dash up, snatch it, and get out of there. Or if they did, that there would be some challenges along the way. And so for this Earth encounter, thematically, I put in this idea of these desiccated, snarling vines. They'd be old brambles that could grapple characters that move through that space, sort of knocking them down. And I had not yet built the maps for this, mind you. I had really just kind of come up with that idea that dropping their movement to zero and then having them fight lizard folk would make things more challenging. And by the by, if you haven't seen the 2024 Monster Manual update, lizard folk are now elementals, which I think is kind of a cool swap. And so I tossed that in here to make the combat a little more challenging. I did let's see here, what room is the air encounter? Room 8. So I did the same kind of thing here for this combat that I put into the air setback room. And came up with the idea that they'd be walking on clouds up in the air potentially, and that these clouds might have lightning. And so came up with this mechanic that is, whenever a creature moves, I roll a 1d6, and on a 1, they get blasted with this lightning, and they've got to take a Constitution saving throw. And so put that in there, and that was made it a relatively low DC because it was going to happen potentially a lot, and didn't want to overwhelm the players as they went through, or the characters as they went through. So tossed that in there. Came up with the idol in this space. I did not yet put any of the magic items in here. That was literally the last thing that I did. But just honestly went through and started doing this for every every puzzle and every encounter. Now, rooms after the halfway point, area 10 here, I made more challenging. So, for example, the Earth puzzle, they walk in, all the doors lock. It's a time trial in this case. We put the idea that the room would start building up with sand, filling up with sand rather, and so they would have a limited amount of time to figure out the puzzle and solve it before potentially suffocating. And I built out rounds that would take, and made this one of the more complicated puzzles that I built out in this case. Um, but the solution for this was that the other doors were unlocked. They'd be able to escape. They'd be able to continue exploring this labyrinth. Um, and so making this a harder encounter, making this a little more lethal, made sense to me because it was in the second half of the adventure. We're rising the difficulty as we go. And we did the same kind of deal for the encounters. I made them low difficulty encounters based off of my XP budget for the first half. And then I made them medium difficulty or moderate difficulty encounters on the second half based off of this budget here. And I made sure to swap it up so that if there was a Earth combat encounter in the first half, then there was an Earth puzzle in the second half. If there was a water puzzle in the first half, then there is a water combat encounter in the second half. So that we never again ended up in a situation where we were just doing, all the fire rooms are a fight, all the water rooms are a puzzle, anything along those lines. So we didn't want that kind of predictability as we went. But I just followed the same process for each and every room as I went through here. And again, it didn't add any more detail than I absolutely needed. Places where that description was important, like the very first room, where I needed to get everybody on the same page. I needed to give them their goal. I needed to kind of set the mood. Yeah, I wrote out a fair amount that I was going to read out to the players as soon as they entered that very first room to kind of set the stage on where they were, what happened, and what is going to happen next, or foreshadow that. Same kind of deal for our BBEG. I gave a little description of that room so that they would know that they've come to an important place. So they would have an idea that this is the climactic encounter, that this is them upon the solution. And then they would have this encounter in here, this combat encounter, along with this ability to escape without winning the combat encounter, coming up with another sort of, again, dual objective, right? We complicate the encounter with something else. In this case, the ability to decipher the runes on the exit door, to deface them, deactivate them, and escape. And what would happen if they failed their attempt to do that. But they could also dash through, solve this, hold off the encounter, and fly their way through the exit and win the adventure once and for all. And then places like the conclusion, where personally I don't like to get to the part of to the end of an adventure and just go, well, guys, you won, congratulations, how was that? So I like to have at least a little snippet at the end that I can read off to kind of formally close these things up. And so I worked on all this. I came up with the whole story, all these little steps in here, all these pieces, and then I sat down and came up with a treasure budget. Again, literally the last thing that I did. And what I settled on as I went through was gold was meaningless in a one shot, because you're not going to spend it. It has no value to you in a game where you don't get to spend it, and you may not be playing these characters ever again. But magic items that you could use within the adventure, those are valuable. So I thought about where we would put these magic items. And then I came up with the idea that they needed to be in rooms where where there was a challenge of some kind. So either a setback, a combat encounter, or a puzzle. And that meant that I had 8 rooms, which means that I needed 8 magic items. And so I just went through the DMG and found out stuff that I thought might be helpful in these situations and was relatively thematic. So things like the immovable rod. We had winged boots in there. We had the Cape of the Mont Blanc, that sort of stuff in there, and just literally just gave one magic item per challenge space, uh, along with the idol or along with whatever the solution to that was. So for example, on the Earth puzzle, which I'm not gonna lie, we didn't play, but it was the one I'm the most proud of. Put things like a potion of heroism in there because again, maybe not elementally thematic, but it's something that might be useful in their final encounter or in one of the other fights or that sort of deal as the characters play through. It gives them something that they might use soon and would give them the upper hand. So I did all that, and then I took a step back and I looked at all of this and I thought, there's nothing going on in the themed rooms. There doesn't need to be a hazard in those spaces, or I should say, there doesn't need to be a trap in those spaces. There doesn't need to be a combat encounter in those spaces. There doesn't need to be a puzzle in those spaces, but there needs to be something. So they're not just empty rooms. So I went back up to my general features and I started brainstorming things that might appear in these various spaces. Again, didn't want to lean into a lot of fights in these. I didn't want to make them puzzle rooms. I didn't want them to be overt challenges, but I wanted to put a little something in there to vex the characters to make this room not just an empty space. And so I came up with this idea of little earthquakes in the and the earth plane rooms, and that they would have a super low DC 5 to stay standing. But if a character failed it on a natural 1, the source of these earthquakes and hegs would burst forward from the ground, and there could be a fight. In the wind room, that was pretty straightforward. Strong winds, disadvantage on ranged weapon attacks and attack rolls. They would extinguish non-magical flame, disperse fog, that flying characters would have to land, that sort of thing. Fire and water, I came up with the sort of concept of that these spaces would be taxing physically to go through. So the fire spaces would be extra hot and they might gain levels of exhaustion as they went through here. That the water spaces, if you got in the water, would be extra cold, and that might give levels of exhaustion in this case here. So that gave a little bit of flavor to the theme rooms. It also gave me levers that I could throw in if needed in some of our challenge spaces. So with that in mind, I sat down and I missed one element here that I wanted to put in, this idea of the hunting, the other competitors here. So I came back to this idea of wanting there to be some sort of press, wanting there to be some sort of competition in this space, that ratcheted up a little bit of pressure was my goal. And so I came up with the idea that there was another adventuring party in here and that only one group could escape alive. So I came up with this idea of the competitors. And I figured out what a medium difficulty challenge rating would be, or a medium difficulty encounter would be in terms of another adventuring party. Went through the Went through the monster manual and kind of figured out, found a few stat blocks that fit into that. That were kind of thematic of an adventuring party. So, a mage, a priest, a scout, a warrior, a spy, and put them together. I gave them a place to start. And then I wanted them to randomly encounter the party. So I made out this idea that every time the players change rooms, that their competitors would as well, and that based off the number of doors in that space, I would roll a die, and that would determine which path they followed and where they went. And if they landed in a room that was one of the puzzle rooms, I'd roll a die, and on one they succeed, and anything else they fail and have to flee. And when I wrote this, thought that was a really cool mechanic. It ended up being insanely difficult to run in real time, a real pain in the ass, and I ended up abandoning it partway through the adventure and changing things up a little bit on the fly. And we're going to talk about that in a minute here. So this is kind of, like I said, kind of the basics of what I did to create this. You'll notice it's pretty bare bones, right? There is not a high level of polish on this. This is a very um, outline focused sort of adventure. But because I'm writing it for myself and I have an idea of these, these pieces and parts, then I don't have to fill in all the gaps because I already kind of know what the gap where how to fill in the gaps from my own imagination. And so you're just writing for yourself in this case here. And so I just put in what I needed and moved on. Now I of course made some um, some maps for this kind of thing, and just to give a feel for each of these spaces, and I'm making a map for every single room. Trying to do variations on the different elements so that there wasn't any real repetition between them. All the spaces felt distinct and unique. So for example, for the air rooms, I made a map that was, a storm giant's, summer home or something along those lines. I a made a battleground for the Aarakocra with lightning here in a shrine. I made a skyship for the characters to explore and move through. I made a puzzle room here with various chimes, and you'll notice that this is our puzzle room. Great. This was a themed room. Nothing really in there. Everything that we did in there was on the fly. Uh, there was a combat encounter in here. So that was our combat setback, our setback room. And then again, nothing in this area, just something for them to explore and engage with and wonder what was going on in the space. So, with all of that, it was time to actually run the adventure. And before I do that, let me jump in and check out some of these comments here since I've been babbling on for a half hour or so. And then we will jump into how I thought this was going to go, and then how it actually went. What went well, what did not go well, what I realized partway through I really should have done and didn't do, and what modifications I made on the fly to adapt this to solve some of the gaps that I found as we are going through the playtest here. So, let's see here. Jonathan Frost up at the top says, "Oh, we missed the gargoyle, green hag, and Galabdor." Yeah, there was one gargoyle in there, but no, the green hag and the Galabdor never made it in. More's the pity. They would have been cool, but they just didn't fit into our budgets. Jonathan Frost says, let's see here. We got a colossal sky chicken, i.e. the Rock. We're going to talk about that because you'll notice, if you've been playing the home game, the Rock appears nowhere in my notes. And so we're going to talk about that was one of the modifications that I made on the fly to fill a hole that I noticed as we were playing. Let's see here. Mr. Mex asks if we underutilized the Sphinx. To be honest with you, that was another one of the holes that I found, is that you did not underutilize the Sphinx. I wanted the Sphinx to be cryptic and not give a lot of information. I didn't want it to be kind of an auto solve. And I undervalued its benefit as a pointer character. And that made it particularly difficult to run because while many characters you can just kind of come up with their narration on the fly, to keep the Sphinx thematic, I needed it to speak cryptically. And I really wanted to speak in riddles. And I don't come up with riddles well on the fly. I don't know many people that do. So I just kind of ran it as vague and winding in its speaking, and a mystic and not very transparent, which I think was okay, but not what I would have really liked to have seen from myself in this adventure. I really would have, if in hindsight, and one of the things that I will change on this adventure going forward is think of some typical kind of questions that characters might ask and have riddles for each one of those. So that the Sphinx can speak in riddles, and the characters get rewarded if they figure those riddles out by gaining some information as they move through. Let's see here. Orth says, we did overthink a lot of the rooms. Yeah, absolutely you did. But that's what it's intended to do, right? That's part of the reason why you put thematic rooms in here that have limited challenge in them, because you want there to be highs and lows in there. You want the characters to encounter problems, fights, puzzles, setbacks, all that kind of stuff. And then you want them to have places where they don't have that because it keeps the tension up and it makes new challenges appear, you know, well, more challenging. They have a larger emotional impact and they can, the characters will go into some of these, thematic rooms that may feel very empty when you're writing this, and they'll come up with their own fun in these spaces. They'll come up with their own things. I mean, you guys certainly did as you were running this. You came up with lots to do in some of these rooms that had very little. You explored the whole skyship, which I had to make up the pieces and parts for that. You'll notice again, the lightning bottles that appeared in that did not show up in my notes. So, for those of you who weren't at the game, uh, they got to that skyship, and instead of just moving between the doors and deciding where they want to go, they decided to search the whole ship. And so I wanted to make it empty and creepy and very kind of out of place. And so it was abandoned. There was nobody on it. It was a skyship, so it needed a mechanical, way of steering it, i.e., chains that moved the masts. It needed to have something in the hold, and I thought maybe it's collecting some of this lightning that they've encountered before in the adventure, and so came up with the idea of there being these literal light jars of lightning in a bottle. And from that idea built out things like it needed a copper bottom to be collecting some of that energy and putting it in there. And then what would happen if somebody picked up those unstable barrels of lightning and tried to use it? And then when the characters spent a lot of time in that space, exploring that, trying to puzzle out, trying to figure out what it was about, that's where I tossed in this idea of the rock, this enormous flying eagle in there, because I realized that I needed to create some time pressure to make a choice in this space, because there was no real puzzle in there, and the characters were creating one for themselves. And we didn't want that to become a long lagging sort of piece of the adventure where there was really nothing to be uncovered, but the characters spent a lot of time as opposed to focusing on some of the real challenges in there without just going, hey guys, there's nothing in here, move on, because that's not as satisfying. So wanted to put some reason why they had to limit their amount of time in there. Let's see here. Moving through this, Jonathan Frost says the Haggai would have been cool if it was in the Hag at the time. Yep, it would have been. And if that had fit into the stat blocks, or that would have fit into the challenge ratings, I probably would have done it. Let's see here. Yeah, Mr. Mex talks about there's an airship with a cool setup, nothing involved with them except the giant murder bird. Yeah, thematic space. There we were. Let's see here. Orth says the rules weren't bad. I didn't get them though. Most of them though. Yeah, you know what? They're not for everybody. And Jonathan Frost mentions, of course, we went through hard mode and fought all the enemies. Yep. You guys absolutely did. And he also mentions never to underestimate your player's cynicism and fear. We will always overthink the situation, expect the worst. Exactly, which is why you want to give some places where the worst doesn't occur, because if it always occurs, then your characters are always ready for it. Fantastic. Yeah. So, a couple other comments here about that. The Mr. Mex, that damn ship. Jonathan Frost, the ship was great space, very eerie with no one there. Great. That was the goal. And then Mr. Mex says, the rock, I was presuming referring to the rock, says that was RJ telling us to get out of the room. Yeah, effectively it was. It absolutely was. It was one of the adaptations I made on the fly where I realized that, while I wanted there to be a time pressure in this, I had not done enough to create that time pressure. And so that's one of the things that I went through and I wanted to adapt. So while we were playing this and we're running the adventure, I was making notes to myself, not just for the game, but also the margin over here, things that I would change, things that I would modify as we went through. And this is, I've got notes based off of your guys' feedback at the end of the game, but I also have, things that I noticed that I wanted to change. And so, with our last little bit of time here, I really want to talk about what worked, what didn't work, what worked, what didn't work, and what I would change for the future, what I anticipated that didn't happen, what I didn't anticipate that did happen, because these are all lesson learned for when you're writing your own adventures. So let us start. Let's start with the competitors as we talk about that because we've got that up. So I really liked the idea of there being another adventuring party in here that was trying to get out, that was in competition with our player characters. Um, I gave a sense of competition. It gave I think it could add a little bit of time press if it was done in a certain way here. Uh, I did not like the mechanic that I wrote out to identify their movement. Rolling a different die because of the variable number of doors in every room as you all move through the spaces was a pain in the butt to do in real time. And then to add a 1d4 on top of that, for some rooms and not for others, that was, again, a real pain. Eventually, what I did was just started making random encounter checks. I'd roll a d20. If they showed up there, they would, if we got the roll, they would show up where the players were, where the player characters were, and we'd have that engagement. And at that point, I would roll whatever number of 44 there were remaining for the challenges that you guys hadn't completed. And as many ones as I got would be as many times as they succeeded and had the idols and what have you. And that was a much cleaner mechanic. And so that also got me thinking about, as we played through, that I really would have put more random encounters in there. I'll be honest with you, I really didn't put any random encounters in there because my initial thought was wandering through this, that the labyrinth sort of pattern of it would be enough of a challenge that we wouldn't need the additional pressure of random encounters. And I think that was a mistake. I think we needed that. I think that would have added a little bit of time pressure that we were missing in some spaces there. It would also encourage you guys to or encourage the player characters to not spend too long in any particular room and not. And it would have made the value of the Sphinx room, where you could safely take a long rest or a short rest, that much more valuable because you didn't have to defend against random encounters that might pop up in the other rooms. So that's something I would change. I would build out a random encounter table and I would put the group of adventurers on it. Also meaning that you might run into them in the second half of the adventure as opposed to the first half of the adventure, which could be even more dynamic and interesting. Also, they could screw with you, steal your idols. They could change things up in the space as they went through. And so making their presence a little more known, which is, again, I think I would change. One of the bits of feedback that Jonathan Frost gave me at the end of the game, which I thought was really, really good, was the idea of we had several sealed doors that you had to complete puzzles or encounters to get through. But it would have been cool if you could lock the doors, or some doors were locked and you needed a way to unlock them that wasn't one of the puzzles. It was a mechanical sort of thing, like with your lockpick tools and what have you. And I like that idea a lot. But it also made me think about the competitors here and that they have, their rogue character. Perhaps could build in a mechanic where some doors were locked by them. So as you go back through the space, there's some doors that have been deactivated. There's some doors that have been locked and sealed that weren't before. The gems out of some doors that make them work had been stolen, so that they couldn't be accessed until you got through with these competitors, which would have made their presence more known and would have made them seem like a less disjointed sort of encounter, I think. So that's one thing that I would have changed. The combat encounters, as we engaged in here, things like the lizard folk, the Aarakocra, other than some unlucky dice rolls in some cases there, um, they they really kind of those kind of went off the way that I wanted them to go at the difficulty that I wanted them to be. Um, and so we didn't want the first half of the adventure to be overly difficult. We wanted it to be a little harder in the second half of the adventure, and that worked out really well, I think. And I liked how that played out. I liked that the hazards were there, but not overly difficult and not overly, not overly damning. But it put a little bit of challenge in there, especially, for example, um, this is, yeah, the wind setback. The Aarakocra room here, which is a room where we had some low dice rolls, and then the hazard of the lightning really made everybody suspicious of whether they could move, where they could move, how that was working. Um, and I thought that that went really, really well. Um, by this room, I realized that I probably should have put some additional traps throughout the space. We had some in the riddle, in the in the puzzle rooms and that kind of thing, but we probably should have put some more in there. And so I improvised a couple traps off the top of my head, and one of the ones that though I should say the one that was encountered was in this space, the electrical charge on the shrine, where we had our rogue have to deactivate that, and to access the shrine, access the idol on it and the hag's eye on there without getting shocked. Again, you'll notice that is not in my notes. That is something that just because I happen to know what DCs were appropriate, what kind of damage was appropriate for that, I could come up with that on the fly, which I felt added to the adventure, and it's something that I would add into it and expand throughout. Um, that being said, you're always going to have to come up with some things on the fly when you run adventures. It's one of the reasons that I really like to do um, this list of budgets and stocks on here, because when I need to throw in something kind of off the cuff, I already have that information for myself. I have something to go into and go, ooh, this wasn't challenging enough. I need to toss in a new creature. What am I going to add to this? I don't want it to be too hard. Okay, well, we've got this list here. We'll grab a water weird and we'll toss that in there because that thematically fits this space. Um, and so having kind of this information at your fingertips helps you out when you're running things that you haven't run before, because let's be honest, the first time you run anything, it's a play test. And when you are writing a campaign for, your friends and family and loved ones and the people that you generally play D&D with, a lot of the times it's the first and only time you'll run that adventure, which means you're playing in playtest mode the entire campaign. So giving yourselves a little bit of safety net information to help you come up with things on the fly is really, really helpful. Um, and something that I've learned the hard way over years of DMing is something that I need to do for myself is have that information at hand. So that's where I start. But again, I thought that the combat encounters went really, really well. The puzzles were of the difficulty that I wanted them to be. I will say that let's see here, which one is the water puzzle? That's from 6. Okay. Um, I will say that like the water puzzle was probably a little easier than I anticipated, but that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. It was one that was solved almost right away. And effectively, the situation here was that inside a crystal dome beneath an ocean expanse, the party finds a crystal clear pool made of an ornate mosaic depicting a crashing wave surrounded by coral statues of 6 large. And you said statues twice in one sentence. That kills me. 6 large statues of marine creatures. And we said a manta ray, an eel, a crab, a sea turtle, seahorse, and a squid. And then around the rim of the pool is the following message engraved in the porous stone. I'm spineless yet still a knight, armored and armed to defend my plight. Choose my visage true, or the ocean's wrath you shall rue. And to me, the solution to that was the crab statue, and you guys got that right away, which was fantastic. It didn't trigger the trap in this space here. You guys solved the puzzle, you got what you needed, and you could move on from here. So even though that was a quick solve, I still feel like it did exactly what I wanted it to do. Um, conversely on that, let's see here again, air puzzle, room 18. Uh, there was an air puzzle here, one where the characters had to uh, ring a number of chimes in order, and if they didn't, then they would get hit with this thunder energy. Um, and that they could discern that order by listening to the wind, by investigating the chimes and realizing that they made different notes and that there might be a scale that they could hit, by looking up into the clouds and looking for solutions there, as there would be some shifting clues in that space. And this is a puzzle that took a little longer to solve, but again, didn't take too much time to solve it. Some creative play, some thinking about what was in this room and what was needed. And you guys came up with the solution, in relatively short order, after having, had the trap set off a couple times. So I was really happy with how the puzzles went. Um, the thematic rooms, that is where I think I would make one of my greatest changes in this adventure here. Because while I really was happy with the amount of um, exploration that went into these spaces, with you guys poking around and doing the various, really kind of hunting through these rooms, and I was happy with the minor hazards that were in these spaces, like the possibility of exhaustion, or the possibility of an anhag incursion. Um, this is where, again, I would have put in a little more time pressure, and I ended up doing that later on. Um, where, for example, the party entered into one of the water theme rooms. This was a large expanse of ice, and so I introduced a frost giant into that space, way outside of their CR rating. Gave them plenty of time to know that it was coming, that it was far off, that it hadn't seen them, that they still had time to react, that kind of thing. But the idea there was to put a little time pressure on the decision in that room and make them run through a door, without really necessarily considering what is the best option entirely, but to get them moving on here. Now, I think that when I redo this, that would be solved with random encounter tables for each element, so that you could have things that showed up and that you do a random encounter in each of the themed rooms as we go, so that you don't necessarily have combat encounters in there, but you have something living in that space, something a little more dynamic in there. Just not to necessarily not necessarily set the characters back or create a situation where they needed to have combat or they needed to solve a puzzle, but to just give them a little more feeling that this is a dynamic place, and the longer they spend here, the more things are going to change. I think I would make that adjustment here as well. Other than that, I think notes to myself are things like, would have added a little more, but added a few more locked doors, would have added some more traps into the adventure here, more than I even came up with on the fly. One of the comments that you guys made was, it suggested that you guys made, or our playtesters made in this case, was poisoned coconuts, which, coconuts, there was palm trees in the oasis where the Sphinx were, where the Sphinx was, and everything in there was pretty helpful and pretty useful. And you're right, it would have been a nice little twist to put in something in that space that was actually dangerous, so that again, made it a relatively harmless kind of place, a relatively useful kind of place, but reminded everybody that there was nice, that there was that they couldn't trust everything everywhere, no matter where they were in the adventure. Also, something that wasn't commented on, but I think I would work into later on, is more taunting throughout the adventure. There is narratively, I invented that the characters are moving through the dungeon of this lich when they activate a trap, and now they're transported to this place, which is really just a trap within the lich's dungeon, and that the lich gives them sort of the outline of what they've got to do. They've got to escape, and this is a sinister game, and yada yada yada. And then the lich is never heard from again. The characters have them in their mind, but the lich is really just kind of is a set dressing character. And I think I would have instead written up some script for the lich to be kind of overheard throughout the dungeon in places where the characters succeed or find themselves in trouble, to sort of taunt them and goad them as they go through. Really kind of building up that character. The But yeah, so those are things that I would adjust moving forward here, and those are some of the things that I thought worked really well. One thing that I will mention is that this was a lot more content than I was planning on it being. Like I said, I planned on this being a 1 4-hour session, and we got halfway through the game in that 1 4-hour session. So it is it's something to keep in mind that you may find yourself as the kind of DM that I am, that completely overestimates how much time it's going to take, or completely underestimates the amount of time that it's going to take for players to get through a particular adventure. That overestimates how much the player characters are going to get through in any particular session, which isn't a big deal when you're writing campaigns, because you just cut them whenever you need to cut them and you pick up next time. It is a bigger deal when you're writing one-shots. And some advice that I have given that I should have taken for myself is one of the best written pacing-wise adventures that I've ever seen is the Light of Xeraxis. It's in the Spelljammer realm, and it is written as a series of episodes with a cliffhanger at every one. And what they have written, and I have run it from start to finish, those adventures fit so almost seamlessly into a 2-hour time block. They just fit perfectly into that space. And so if you really want to look at pacing, you really want to have a good idea of what is a 2-hour chunk of time, and therefore what players can get through in 2 hours or 4 hours or 6 hours or what have you. That is a really cool adventure to check out. Now, I think there's a lot of other things can be improved about that adventure overall, but the pacing is terrific. All right, so that is about what I want to talk about here. So we got a few other comments in the chat. Let's kind of move through those, and if there's other questions you guys have, other comments, that kind of deal, jump in. So let's see here. Mr. Mex says, "Ooh, that would have been a great idea. Force players to go through newer doors." Oh, in relation to your competitors locking doors and sealing some things and stealing some of the gems so people couldn't go through. Yeah, absolutely. It might have also encouraged. I mean, I appreciate that you like that. I think it would have done the same thing too. It would have forced the characters to take routes they hadn't before instead of going through familiar routes. It also probably would have suggested to the player characters that they too could sabotage some of these spaces as part of this competition. Let's see here. Orth says, "Did enjoy that campaign a lot. The encounters were fun. I'm glad you had a good time. I had a good time running with you. Certainly don't want this episode to suggest that this went poorly or anything along those. I thought it actually went very well overall, but we're always trying to be better DMs. We're always trying to improve upon our own product and our own style of play. And so I think it's valuable after you run something that you've written to sit down and honestly say with yourself that, I was very happy with how this worked. I was unhappy with how this worked. Here's something that I think could have been improved. Here's how I'd fix the things that didn't quite work out the way I wanted them to go. Here's how we'd reinforce the things that did work out well, so that you advance every time. Because really the only person you're competing with as a DM is yourself. You just want to be a better DM each session than you were the session before. Let's hear. Jonathan Frost says, "One idea you might think about is having obvious doors and then hidden secret doors." I did think about that, to be honest with you, Jonathan. And it was one of my regrets that I couldn't figure out a way personally to make that work in a satisfying way. Um, the idea of a labyrinth, um, I think, really lends itself well to secret doors. But as you'll notice from my design here, I already had a freaking rat's nest of pathways that went to the various spaces. And while I wanted to work in some secret doors to that, I was trying to figure out where they would go without it creating, again, situations where if you discover these doors, you could avoid a lot of these hurdles. Um, so I also was kind of struggling with how we might hide secret doors in certain spaces. For example, in air spaces, could you find it within the clouds? Would you guys think to look for them within the clouds? Um, I didn't have a good answer to that in the time period in which I had to write this adventure. I think if we were writing it with more time, very much like we do with our Domain of Dread, could absolutely come up with an answer to that solution or a solution to that question. But I didn't. I did not in that time period. So I agree with you. It's a good idea. I would like to figure out how to work that in a following iteration of this adventure. And the Jonathan Frost says you can telegraph that with having some rooms all have obvious doors, and they are all the same number of doors. So when you find a room with less doors, it sets off the idea of a search. I don't disagree with you on that. But as you may have noticed, there were fewer doors in the rooms in the second half of the adventure. Some rooms only had 3 doors. Some rooms only had 2 doors. I don't think you guys ended up in the rooms that only had 2 doors in them, as opposed to the 4 doors that were in almost every room in the first half of the adventure, which is again one of the things I couldn't. That I is one of the things that I was having trouble squaring away with how I was going to telegraph that, knowing that there would be a different number of doors by necessity in the second half of the adventure, because that was one of the modifications I made to ensure that everybody couldn't just, or that the party couldn't luck out and find a path forward where they didn't have to go through any encounter or setback. Um, but again, I'm with you. I think it's a cool idea. I think the idea of a labyrinth and an escape room vibes really lends itself well to that. And I want to figure out a good way to do that. Mr. Mech says you made great locations, so we have to explore everything. Yeah, I enjoyed you guys exploring everything. And Mr. Orth says, I felt that because it was a custom one shot, that it'd be rude not to explore the rooms. This also led to a lot of overthinking. You know, I appreciate that. I put time and effort into this kind of thing. I love when you guys interact with that kind of stuff, but don't feel obligated to explore content that I created. I'm going to run this other times. Other people will explore it. It's not a big deal, but I really did enjoy the kind of exploration that you guys put in this and thinking through each of these spaces. That was a lot of fun for me. Um, Mr. Mex says having to change use of doors would pull us out of the set path back to safety. Yeah, absolutely. Mixing that up a little bit would force you to come up with new new routes forward. And now that I'm kind of thinking about it, to that end, something that I think I would probably adjust in here as well is the very first room that you all encountered, and I will pull up the map of that for you guys, or that I should say there's people watching this who have not been in this adventure, was this space here. And it again was one of these combination of earth, fire, water, air sort of spaces with, clouds in the sky, raging sea. You've got a barren earth rock here, and then we had a little torch, a little brazier of fire in the center there to represent that. And so when Jonathan Frost's character, who was a rogue, came in and wanted to investigate these doors, you may have noticed I did not have a description of those doors written in my notes, and so I came up with one on the fly, and that was it. They were brass archways with kind of a bank vaulty kind of feel to them, so you had a flywheel that you had to spin to open them up, and they were decorated with several glowing gems, and the color of the glowing gems correlated to where those doors went. So, green for earth, red for fire, white for air, blue for water, right? So, being the dynamic, investigative player that Jonathan is, had his rogue see what happens if he pulls out some of the gems. I thought that makes a lot of sense. You pull out the gem, door deactivates, you can't get through it. Put the gem back in, door reactivates, you can get through it. If I had really been on my toes, it would have occurred to me that an easy way to lock these doors and to force some more exploration and perhaps put some things that there were to find in the theme rooms, some more things there were to find in the theme rooms. I could have some of those doors be deactivated and the gems could be scattered around the theme rooms, meaning that if you find them, you'd be able to open up new passageways. And if you didn't find them, some routes would be closed to you, and you'd have to take, you'd have to circumvent different areas to find them to enter into. So again, that's something else that I think I would probably work into in the next iteration of this adventure. Let's see here. Mr. Rick says, I had a blast as player. Fantastic. At the end of the day, that's all that matters, right? I can talk about all the things I would change and improve and the things that I liked, but it really comes down to players having a good time. The only metric that really matters is, are your players enjoying themselves? And are you enjoying yourself? And if the answer to those questions is yes, then you've been a success as a DM. If the answer to that question is no, well, then you definitely want to change something. But again, reviewing your process only makes you better, only increases the likelihood that your characters are going to enjoy, or your players are going to enjoy your adventures, and that you're going to have fun running them. Let's see here. Mr. Rick says, maybe work in one of the characters, me being a werewolf, or they could be a were-tiger. I told you we would figure that out for the for the Halloween one shot. All right, we will make that happen in a Halloween one shot. Absolutely. And Ben Elder says, I get that. We should leave and not push our luck. Can you please just push your luck? Yeah. Yeah. It's again, I've been DMing 5e, in particular for, what, 10 years at this point. I've been playing D&D for 30 years. I'm still not anticipating everything that my players do. They are going to come up with some really unique, inventive things that you're like, I would have never thought to do that as a player. That adds a lot of flavor to the games. And one of the best things you can do as a DM is make notes of that as you go. Especially if you're playing with the same players again and again and again, because it will give you some ideas on the sorts of things that you are going to want to have built out, that you want to reward, that you want to play with those expectations, whether you want to lean into them or subvert them. It'll give you more and more tools as as you build stronger relationships with those players. Let's hear. Finally, Mr. Mex says, this concept was for my girlfriend since she loves puzzles and she had a great time playing it. Well, I thank you very much. I had a great time playing with her too. And I had a great time coming up with these puzzles. This one was a little more puzzle heavy than a lot of my adventures, but that was kind of fun to stretch my wings and get to do some puzzles that I don't normally get to toss into these things. So that was a lot of fun for me to build. All right, well, we are well past our time, so let's go ahead and wrap this up here. I just want to say thank you all for being my playtesters. Thank you all for coming in and joining us and kind of seeing my commentary as we kind of tear apart this adventure that I wrote, and we compare it to sort of the very high level of gloss that we put on things in our our regular episodes of this channel, and that there's no one right way to do this. Sometimes you want to write things fast, run them and break them. Sometimes you want to spend a lot of time building them out and make them feel very good and look very good. And it really just depends on the situation that you're in and what your ultimate goal is for the adventure that you're running. So that being said, if you are watching this and you would ever like to be one of my playtesters for a one-shot, or you have a custom one-shot idea that you would like me to create and run for you, you can check me out at startplaying.games/GM/RJ Kerr and click that request booking button, and we can start a conversation about what sort of adventure you want to have, whether it's a one-shot, a campaign, whether that's homebrew or a module. whether that's custom or something you've created yourself and you just want somebody to run for you. I'm happy to work with you on all of that. So thank you so much. And again, if you enjoy this content, please like, subscribe, leave a comment. All that stuff helps the channel grow and keeps these chats as dynamic as ever. So again, thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you all for a episode this Friday, 8:30 p.m. Central Time if you're in the U.S. Hope to see you all there. Talk to you soon. Bye now.